What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk with me on this Tuesday afternoon. A lot to get into today. We're going to talk about SEC spring meetings, sort of wrap up what we learned over the course of the 3 days down in Destin. We're going to talk about Georgia recruiting, some very productive news and worthwhile news for Georgia on the recruiting trail the last few days. We're going to talk some NFL news involving some former Dogs. Especially one getting ready for his rookie season. And we're going to welcome on Olivia Sayer to wrap up Georgia baseball. Georgia's season ending on Sunday during the Athens Regional with a loss to Oklahoma State. So stick around. Should be a fun show. Make sure and subscribe to Dogs 24/7 on YouTube. And hey, go to dogs247.com. We have a 60% off sale. Hope you guys will join us over there and become part of the Junkyard. A lot of good conversation, a lot of good discussion this time of year. So let's get the show underway. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk with me on this Tuesday afternoon. Guys, we're going to wrap up what we learned from SEC spring meetings. We're going to talk about two big commits for Georgia as they continue building both the 2026 and the 2027 recruiting classes. We're going to talk some NFL news involving the Dogs, and then we're going to welcome on Olivia Sayer, our Georgia baseball beat writer, who will wrap up the Bulldogs season, Georgia baseball season ending on Sunday with a tough loss to Oklahoma State. But first, guys, let's talk about spring meetings. We recorded our last Junkyard Dawgcast episode when I was down there in Destin. Just wanted to sort of provide some parting thoughts, some of the things we learned, especially after the last time we recorded. There wasn't a ton of changes made or really things officially decided by the SEC down in Destin. A lot of it was discussion. A lot of it was sort of posturing for certain things the SEC wants to see, especially when it comes to the playoff going forward. I'd say the biggest piece of news, the biggest thing that was actually decided, they made some changes when it comes to teams having fans storm the court, having fans storm the field. We had seen an escalator as far as the fines that would be given out. Now it's just flat out first offense, $500,000 fine. They're really working to try to protect the athletes and the coaches on the court and on the field. But other than that, I mean, the biggest thing was part of the conversation we had last week was the playoff discussion. And it sure looks like the SEC's wanting to see a 5-11 model, 5 automatic bids. Seems like that would be for the highest ranked conference champions and then 11 at-larges. And the biggest part of that, sort of the momentum going behind that is because the SEC wants to try to get as many teams in as they can. It seemed like going into SEC spring meetings, the momentum was toward this model where they had 4 automatic bids. The Big Ten had 4 automatic bids, and then you had the Big 12 and the ACC getting 2, a group of 5 champion getting 1, and then 3 at-larges. But I think as the discussion happened last week, the SEC sort of determined, look, let's not sell ourselves short. Let's not put ourselves in a box where we can't try to get 5 or 6 teams, maybe even more than that, in a 16-team playoff. So I think the playoff was probably the biggest point of discussion, and where getting sort of the temperature of where the SEC is there was probably the biggest development down in Destin. I'll start with you, Kipp. What did you make of what we sort of learned on that playoff discussion, that it really looks like the 5-11 model is what the SEC favors? And, we'll see what happens, but I would have to imagine as long as the SEC and the Big Ten are on the same page with this, the 5-11 model is probably what we're getting.
If anything, the Big Ten just knows that the SEC is the one calling the shots here, that they're the conference that everyone's waiting to see exactly what the SEC decides. And Greg Sankey basically made that known. Obviously, we're coming off the SEC spring meetings, but you didn't have this discussion at this this large during the Big Ten meetings. They were kind of quiet in comparison. And I just think that, Greg Sankey spent all week just touting the SEC schedule, showing everyone that for basically a decade, the SEC had the toughest schedule in the country, and saying, guys, if you're going to push us to a 9-game conference schedule, it's not going to come cheap. And then we're not just talking about the TV deal. He wants to make sure that his conference is taken care of, and everyone else is basically going to have to fall in line. And I mean, there's not really much argument that you can make against the conference. Like, who is going to come out there, including the Big Ten, and take a stand against what Greg is saying? He's got the data that backs it up. And at the same time, like, this conference has been at the forefront of college football for a long time. So he's looked through the data, and if you're going to have this conference take on an extra, conference game, then he's going to look for at 5, if not more than 5 teams in the top 12, especially if they go to 16. If this expands to 16, then, he's saying the calculus has changed once again. We're probably looking at 6 or more teams in that situation. So it's new numbers. If you're wanting to expand, then everything changes. If you're wanting more games in conference, then the money and the automatic bids have to change, and you still have to try to protect the conference championship. So I think at the end of the day, he's saying we don't know how the future of this playoff format is going to be, and we're not going to make any decisions till we know for sure what we're working with. And that's basically where college football is overall when we're talking about NIL and the settlement and where things are going to go with revenue sharing. Everything's just in wait and see mode. So why make any decisions now?
Yeah, I think you summed it up pretty well there, that they are not going to be in a rush to make a decision when they don't have to. And now I do think that they want answers. I think particularly when it comes to if they want to move to a 9-game conference schedule, but the SEC is right there with the Big Ten and having all the leverage and having the 2 biggest conferences, and 2 conferences that I think we discussed last time. The expectation is eventually we're going to see 2 super conferences. So they're going to wait until it makes sense to make decisions, and they've got the ability to do so. Ben, what do you think of this 5-11 talk and where the SEC finds itself when it comes to the playoff discussion?
I mean, surely I'm not the only one that just rolls my eyes every time we have these various like auto qualifier, what format conversations. It's like, look, we're talking about 16 teams. We're like less than 15 years removed from 2 teams having a chance to play for the championship. Like, we're talking about 16 teams. Like, it is very hard for me to care whether it's 4-4, 2-2, 2-1-1, whether it's 5-11. Hell, you could do BCS and just do 1 through 16 for all I care. Like, I don't care. We're talking about 16 teams. I'm very confident that when we're talking about 16 teams, the best team in the country is going to be involved in that conversation and is going to have their team in the playoff, which ultimately, to me, is the entire purpose of this whole exercise that we're doing, is identifying who the best team in the country is. You can do 16 however it is you want. I'll be okay with it. I'm not going to complain about expansion. I am getting to the point at wanting to start to complain about the every single off season. How many conference games are you going to play? How, what's the format going to be? How many teams are even going to be in it? Like, everyone complains about college football, not like the future of it doesn't look great, or we're in dire times in college football. I'm not even in denial of that, but a lot of it is just the stupidity of the conversations that we have around the sport. Like, we end up having to spend all of our time talking about playoff formats. Like, I want to be talking about like the players and the rosters and, the matchups and all these types of things. It's like, I realize it's the off season, so that's just part of it. And this is when these decisions are getting made, but it just annoys me. It's just like, guys, come on. We're talking about 16 teams here. Like, I get where Greg Sankey's coming from. Greg Sankey's doing his job, right? Like, his job is to do what is best for the Southeastern Conference, and all of these conference commissioners, that is their job. And I completely understand, I get people were ripping on Greg Sankey for sending out the media memo that was talking about all of the historical data on where the SEC would fall in the top 16 and why they favor the 5 versus 11. And I get why people would be critical of him, but he is doing what he's supposed to do. He's the commissioner of the SEC. What else is he supposed to do other than create the best opportunity for all of the constituents within the SEC? So to me, I'm annoyed by the conversation, but I also get why everybody has their stance on it. It is an important, like, as a conference commissioner, and when you're looking out for the teams within your conference, like, this is very important times when it comes financially for the conference, and also just, the future brand recognition for all of the various teams that are within it. So I get it from their perspective. I just make some decisions. Like, I know it's easier said than done, but like, just make some decisions so that we can move on.
Well, here's the thing that I had the biggest issue with, and it's another part of this playoff conversation. As spring meetings went on, Greg Sankey brought up that they want to see the playoff committee's criteria be adjusted. They want to see strength of schedule become a bigger factor. And I think that that's another piece, sort of another variable when it comes to if the SEC is going to move to 9 games. I'm going to sit here and tell y'all, I think they're moving to 9 games, and it's because the SEC is going to get more money from ESPN. Like, I think that they can posture as much as they want and try to, kind of get people to think, well, maybe if we'll change this, the SEC will do this. I think, from what we've seen, I think the Athletics, Seth Emerson, and there was another athletic reporter talked about that ESPN was open to paying more money. Like, I think that's going to be the conversation. But to see them wanting the criteria changed, do we remember 2 years ago that the SEC got Alabama in when Florida State was undefeated? Like, to me, that's where I'm like, all right, guys, calm down a little bit.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's like, do we really live in a world where strength of schedule hasn't mattered? Like, I understand there have been, 1 or 2 decisions here and there where people have said, oh, this team's better than that team. How'd they get in? It's like 11-1 Indiana and Alabama, 9-3 Alabama, or 9-3 Ole Miss, or 9-3 South Carolina. Like, that's kind of what people are complaining about here. And it's like, I think Alabama or SC or Ole Miss would have been in over 2-loss Indiana. Right. So it's like 3-loss teams are able to get in over 1-loss teams. There were multiple 2-loss SEC teams that were in over 1-loss Indiana. So, like, to me, the whole like SEC strength of schedule, like, I think SEC does get strength of schedule favorability. And I think that's where people outside of the SEC have rightful complaints, is like, they're like, everyone talked about strength of schedule has to matter. Strength of schedule has to matter. It's like, how is 2-loss Georgia was already ahead of 1-loss Indiana? Whether they won or lost the SEC championship game, they were already going to be ahead of 1-loss Indiana. Like, the fact that Georgia's strength of schedule was harder than Indiana was acknowledged by the playoff committee. And so, is it perfect? No, but like, we're talking about 12-game sample sizes here. Like, it's not like we have 30-game sample sizes to be able to say, all right, this is a huge difference. Like, we're talking about 9-3 versus 10-2, or 10-2 versus 11-1. Like, yes, you can factor in strength of schedule, but I don't think you can just say, oh, your strength of schedule was better, you got to go in over them. Like, it's not as simple as that either.
How do you even establish strength of schedule when you're moving to a 9-game conference schedule? You don't have a way to compare how the conference is compared to the other conferences. Like, sure, the SEC versus a group of 5, okay, I get it. And even to an extent, like the ACC, I get that as well. But it all comes down to Big Ten and SEC. And if you're not playing each other, you got no way to compare these conferences, see the health and the actual power that these conferences have in any given year. And you're all going to beat each other up during the season, and you're jockeying for position and trying to talk about strength of schedule when you don't even know who the good teams are. You base it on preseason rankings. Those go out the window when you start beating each other, and you're all guessing. So it goes back to what you guys just brought up. I think we had it better with the BCS. We continue to go back and try to figure out the metrics to figure out who the best teams are. We're like 30 years into this, still haven't figured it out. I don't think you can use strength of schedule as a metric, but good luck trying to actually explain and prove to people how strength of schedule even exists, and that you actually know at any point during a season whether you have a strong schedule or not.
I will say I don't think the BCS was the issue. It was just that there were only 2 teams that were given a chance to play for the national championship. I mean, I think the BCS was a fine system. Just expand the number of teams that are included in that.
I mean, look at this committee. Like the committee picking out the college football playoff committee. Like they go behind closed doors. It looks, more sus than the NBA draft lottery. And they just come out and then they have a guy give a speech on why he did everything. But it changes every week, and we make fun of it throughout the year. Every single time the rankings come out, we're making fun of it. And that shows we have no faith in this process. And it just, we keep trying to fix things when it was not broken to begin with.
Ben hit on the biggest thing for me. Like, I think in a perfect system, there's 8 teams. I think when we got to 12, we've already lost the plot, and now we were at 12 for a year, and they were already ready to move on to 16 because they want more teams to have a chance, and it's all about the money. And Ben, you seem like you had something you wanted to ask.
Well, just like I actually don't have an issue with the expansion. Like I've been one in the past that have said, hell, you can do 32 teams. I don't care about that. But when we get to 16 and 32 and we're complaining about the format of who is allowed to be considered to be in, that's when it's crossed the line for me. It's like, guys, we're now expanding it to the point where we don't really care how many teams have gotten in, and we still have issues with, is the 6th or 7th best SEC team going to get into the college football playoff? Guess what? If the 6th or 7th best SEC team was going to win the national championship, they would have been higher up in the SEC. I'm just going to say that.
Well, it goes back to last year for me. I have no sympathy for South Carolina, who got blown out by Ole Miss, who lost to Kentucky and then lost to Florida, and Alabama, who got absolutely pantsed by Oklahoma. You're not going to get any sympathy from me when you've got those losses. Like, that's the way it is. I did want to bring up, Kipp was talking about strength of schedule and talking about, without having the conference play each other. And now that's a big part of the conversation, is that there were SEC coaches, Brian Kelly, Sam Pittman, Shane Beamer, talking about they want to see an alliance with the Big Ten to see those 2 conferences play games. I think Ben and I talked a little bit about this on the podcast on the Stay Wolk show, but I wanted to get your opinion, Kipp, of what you think of seeing the SEC and the Big Ten schedule non-conference games. And then when it comes to Georgia, who would you want to see if this comes together?
Listen, I'm all for it. I mean, like, just let's eliminate any doubt, bragging rights. I mean, when you get fan bases like this together and give them the opportunity to play in these kind of games, who wouldn't want that? Like, those are exactly the kind of games that are great for college football. As long as you can do it without eliminating, the traditional rivalries in the conference, then sign me up. And my sister went to Penn State. She got her master's from Penn State. I spent a year and a half there and hated every minute of it. And I will say that I would love to see Georgia play at Penn State so that I can go up there and complain about, the fan experience compared to Athens, just to get that comparison. But also, I mean, that's just something that in my household would be something we would talk about for a long time. I just think that's the kind of game. I mean, the playing it, those road games, Georgia fans got that, that narrative of how well they travel when they, played at Notre Dame. I mean, those kind of games are just like, you can get a whole new generation of fans that way. People are still talking about going to that game and how big it was. So I think that specific game for me would really hit home because, those 2 fan bases are kind of dissimilar in their trash talking and where they think they are in the hierarchy and argument over, whether they're a blue blood and things like that. They're kind of in that same position. So I think that matchup would really, just galvanize both fan bases and be great for the local economies. I mean, let's just imagine all the Penn State fans coming down. That would be an eye-opening experience for them as well.
I made the point the other day, but we need these games to be home and homes. Just please do not put these on neutral sites. Penn State's a good one. I think the 2 that I would like to see, I'd like to see an Oregon series just to kind of get the same Kirby and Dan Lanning thing that Kirby had with Nick Saban and kind of change, the storyline there. But USC, I think Georgia hasn't played USC since like 1960. And I think a lot of that kind of is tied to if USC can take a step forward. And I think this is a big year for Lincoln Riley when it comes to that. But that's sort of what I look at those two. And Penn State would be a fun one. And of course, Ohio State. Those two, that would probably be a playoff preview if we got to see that in the years to come. Ben, any addition? Yeah, go ahead.
If Georgia plays at USC before playing at Texas A&M, I don't even know.
Ben, any thoughts on the potential of this Big Ten and SEC scheduling alliance?
I mean, I definitely think Penn State would be a very fun one. I mean, any of the big time, I mean, Oregon, USC, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, like any of those would be fun. I was actually starting to think like, what are some other matchups around the SEC that could be compelling? I was thinking about, Alabama having to go on the road to Washington, Kalen DeBoer go back to a place that he took him to a national championship. Honestly, I like Ole Miss or Mississippi State playing like Rutgers and just like having Mississippi cowbells take over Jersey would just be a hilarious moment for people. I can't imagine there have been that many, Mississippi State at Rutgers or Boston College type of football games, but having like, I think sometimes when people think of SEC fans, they think of the top of the SEC, but when you think about like a Mississippi State that hasn't had a ton of championships, but they've got as rabid of a fan base as you're going to find. And they're the type of fans that would travel up to go play a Rutgers or a Boston College or something like that. And I think I guess Boston College is not Big Ten, but neither here nor there. Them getting to witness what like crazy SEC fans are like, I think would be really fun as well. I'm sure there's some other like under the radar matchups that would be kind of fun, but I was starting to think Kalen DeBoer having to go back and, face his former team up at Washington, I think would be a fun one.
Along the same lines, Illinois and Arkansas, you got Brett Bielema.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kip.
I was just looking it up to see if they've ever played. They've never played.
The thing with me, and I brought this up to Brandon Marcello when we were down in Destin, Brett Bielema was pitching an SEC Big Ten challenge like 10 years ago, and he was still at Arkansas at the time. So, like, all this talk, let's give Brett Bielema a little credit. He was ahead of the game on there. Now, he's in the other conference now, but I think that would be fun. It seems like a Wisconsin, Tennessee, that feels like a classic, like, Tampa bowl game. Justin Ferguson brought up, I think Auburn and Iowa have never played. That feels like that would be a pretty fun series. I think you could get some good matchups along the way, even outside of like the classic, Ohio State, Alabama, or Michigan and Georgia. You could get some really fun matchups when you put all these teams together.
I mean, I think this is a great way to manufacture some renewed hate in college football. Everybody hates the system and the decision makers or whatever. We need to get back to just hating random opponents that you play. And I think this would be a fun way of doing it. I also will say I do love the lottery draw where all the Big Ten and SEC ADs get together and there's a lottery draw to determine who's playing who that next season. I think that would be a fun format too.
That's primetime TV. I mean, we're talking about the way the draft is on and it's must-watch TV. Like, you can make money off this, and who better to make money off that than ESPN, who has the SEC contract? I mean, it feels like they probably just have to go back to the negotiating table, and Greg Sankey would just hold ESPN to the fire and say, if you want to have this lottery televised, that's an extra like $10 million per program, but still that seems perfect. Like, dial me up. I want scheduling chaos.
Yeah.
When would this happen? Like, when would the lottery happen? Like, I don't know.
Knowing the way this works, it would happen like right in the middle of the two big June official visit weekends. They'd be like, oh, this would be the right time to do it. But no, I do like. Jordan and I talked about this last week, but I think if you have it where it's a home, either side, Big Ten or SEC has home field advantage, it's almost like whoever, this would never get accepted because teams would feel like they have to get fair, home field advantage as well. But like, to me, all the teams play, all the Big Ten teams host or all the SEC teams host. And if you kind of got to like steal home field advantage back, and it's like if the SEC wins more games than on the road against the Big Ten, they take back home field advantage. And then you do the offseason lottery and you find out, all right, the SEC won the SEC Big Ten Challenge this year, this offseason, we're drawing and finding out which SEC team you're going on the road to play. Like, I don't know. I love it. Would also probably never happen.
Greg Sankey call us. Also, I'll throw this out. Georgia, Minnesota, the Glenn Mason Bowl, the thing that everybody was waiting to see.
That's right. I knew I was just thinking that.
The one other thing I wanted to mention before we take a break and kind of wrap up SEC spring meetings talk, the very last day, Greg Sankey said that he felt like everybody was on board. All 16 SEC teams are in agreement when it comes to the College Sports Commission. And this was a big point of conversation going into Destin, was that would everybody agree to basically sign a contract that says, look, this commission is going to come in and essentially enforce the House settlement, which as we record this, a House settlement has still not been finalized. But there was a lot of talk and a lot of attention to Tennessee because the state of Tennessee had passed a bill basically saying, I'm going to just read this summary, that athletes in the state of Tennessee can receive compensation from NIL collectives until explicitly told otherwise by federal law, antitrust law, or a valid court order. And I pointed out in all of that, you'll notice that the NCAA or a proposed commission are not included in that enforcement list. So there was a lot of, people on edge about, okay, is Tennessee already trying to skirt these House settlement rules before they've even been implemented? Based on what Greg Sankey had to say in Destin, everyone's on the same page when it comes to the House settlement and staying within the guardrails. And Kipp, to me, I mean, as long as that is the thought in the room, is that everybody's going to follow the settlement, at least in the SEC. I mean, that's a big step in the right direction because this is all going to fall apart unless all 16 teams are on board.
I mean, all 16 teams can be on board. It's still going to all fall apart. You're going to have lawsuits immediately questioning every single one of these agreements, and you're going to find loopholes left and right. And I mean, even Lane Kiffin brought it up. He just said, like, you want regulation around it. He's been like that for a long time, but he knows, like, until you actually get collective bargaining and real contracts, you're just going to have people arguing because they're going to fight any single kind of regulation because of antitrust issues. I just think that that's the reality of it. And so I still think, sure, you want to let this House settlement go into effect, see if federal legislation can help, but that this just, I mean, that's a true fallacy just to think that that's actually going to work, that, that the congressional action is going to fix things, that the courts are going to just hold true. I just think that this is all just, we're hoping for something that has almost no chance of happening. So this is where we're at. You can keep hoping and you can give them rules. But while the colleges and coaches are like, give us this framework to work with, and on the player side, who's representing them? The lawyers are going to work for their clients, and they're going to look at this and they're going to punch holes through it immediately. And we're going to be right back to the drawing table. So sure, let's see if this settlement goes through, and let's see where the first lawsuit comes from. But I just don't think there's a path to where the player side, they just let this be in place and then let their clients potentially get what they think is the short end of the stick.
Two parties I feel sorry for in these next few months. It's that College Sports Commission, and it's Deloitte, who's in charge of the clearinghouse that's going to look at these NIL deals, because to Kipp's point, there's going to be a lot of poking holes through these different plans and what can be cleared and what cannot be cleared. And it's going to be, I think it's Andrew Brandt who always tweets there will be lawyers, and that's just going to be, college sports, at least for the next year. Ben, what do you think of, Sankey saying that everybody's on board with the commission, with what it means for House enforcement and really what the path forward will wind up looking like?
It's like Kipp said, I think we'll find out when people are down with it or not. Like, it's going to be interesting to see. I was just having a conversation about this morning where it's like, there's going to be a situation that comes up. It might be things that have been unfolding already with the 2026 class, for all we know, where once this goes into place, now there is going to be some kind of clearinghouse and enforcement structure that you don't totally know if everything's going to be greenlit, and you got to find out if it's going to be greenlit. And if it's not, that's when we're really going to find out how down people are with the model and the system, or how much they just care about going and, getting the top players on their recruiting board. And, it's fascinating. Like, I think what's interesting to me about this whole thing really is like college football, probably more than any other sport, is the one that kind of gets the tag of like cheating is always going on. There's always funny business happening. And like, I think a lot of people are skeptical that you can even, because of what college football has been for so long, you can even transition into a world where that's not happening. And so I'm fascinated to find out. Like, I don't know. Like, I am maybe naive in all of this, but like, I think that teams are operating differently in their minds in terms of how they feel like they can put rosters together than they have in the past. I do believe that. I also don't have access to every single program in America to be able to say that everyone feels that way. And so we'll see. It's going to be an interesting, what's the date I think that came out? It's like the 27th maybe is the next date that we're looking at, is something possibly going down. So, we'll probably find out by the beginning of August how much hell is broken loose with everything that's been going on this summer. I do find it fascinating that we're in a recruiting window where all of the important conversations for the financial futures of all of these players is being decided on these official visits. And they're basically having to have those conversations and decide who they want to commit to without really knowing what the landscape is going to look like. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, stay tuned to dogs247.com because we will have all kinds of coverage. And like Ben and Kipp kind of laid out there, look, we know there's going to be a line, but when there's a line in the sand, somebody's going to try to step over it. And we're going to have to see who that is and what it looks like as far as enforcement and what comes out of that. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back. We're talking about 2 new commits for Georgia. We're going to talk about some NFL news involving 2 former Bulldogs. And we're going to welcome on Olivia Sayer to wrap up Georgia baseball. I want to make sure and plug 60% off over at dogs247.com. Great time to get on board. Very busy recruiting season. We're going to continue the countdown to the season. We're less than 2 months away, less than 3 months away, rather, before Georgia and Marshall face off to open the season. Lots of great content. Olivia Sayer's got her baseball transfer portal tracker up because that is now the mode now that Georgia is going into off-season mode. So wanted to make sure and encourage you guys, sign up to Dogs 24/7, 60% off. Join us on the Junkyard. We'll take a quick break and be right back. All right, Ben, we got 2026 recruiting news and 2027 recruiting news for Georgia. You had Carter Lucky, defensive lineman and the brother of tight end Lawson Lucky, committing to Georgia over the weekend. And then on Monday, 2027 receiver Gavin Honor commits to the Bulldogs as well. Now, we'll go in depth on the Stay Wolk episode about these guys and sort of what we've learned. But just in general, what do you think of these 2 additions for the Bulldogs and just how recruiting has gone for Georgia, especially in the 2026 class in recent weeks?
Well, things are trending in the right direction. I mean, I think I do our at the beginning of every month, the recruiting month in review. And I think at the end of April, Georgia was 27th in the team recruiting rankings. When I did the one earlier this week, Georgia's in 6th in the team recruiting rankings and 1st among all SEC programs right now. So, not that anybody was ever concerned about where things would eventually trend with Georgia recruiting, but, business as usual when it comes to a Kirby Smart recruiting class being put together, even in a new world, even when you miss out on guys like Mark Bowman and Jackson Cantwell that you really, really want. That's recruiting. It's always been that way. There have been great players that Georgia wanted that they didn't get. That's not new because of this new, world that we live in. In Carter's case, I'll talk about that one a little bit more just because I know him more and I'm more familiar with the actual prospect that Georgia is getting. I don't think there was ever any scenario where Carter Lucky was going anywhere other than Georgia. Like, we try and build intrigue and try and not say like, oh, this is obvious, this is where it's going, or we know that this is going to happen all the time, because it is recruiting. Weird things happen. You never totally know. And also, you want to at least give some respect to Carter Lucky's moment and say like, all right, you do have somewhat of a decision to go through, but Carter Lucky was always going to end up in Georgia's class. He was always going to take a Georgia official visit and not end up taking any other official visits. When I talked to him back in February, he already had his Georgia official visit scheduled for the May 30th weekend. And then when I was asking him, where else are you going to take official visits to? He was like, well, I don't even really know where else I might take official visits to. And he was like, I want to get back up to Ohio State. I want to get back down to Florida State. But it was pretty obvious then, like, this is Carter Lucky's younger brother. Their dad is, their legacies upon legacies at Georgia. Carter Lucky and Lawson Lucky's kids are going to play at Georgia. Like, that's just the way that it is. And so not really much of a recruiting surprise there in terms of the talent, as it was described to me by somebody that I trust on this. You're never going to complain about a frame like that in the state of Georgia that that you can bring into the class on the defensive line. Kirby Smart's talked over and over again over the last year and a half plus. His lines of scrimmage are not as deep and what they need them to be. And how do you fix that in this new landscape where you're churning roster more than you used to? You build through in-state defensive linemen that fit the frame of what eventual Georgia NFL guys are. And Carter Lucky is absolutely that. He's someone that could play probably 3 tech. You could probably bulk him up and he can move inside a little bit more than that. He's versatile, but I think the big thing with Carter is he's dealt with some injuries over the last year or so. Like, he's coming off of a labrum surgery this offseason as well. And so I don't think we've come anywhere close to seeing the best of what Carter Lucky is going to be able to be. And I think that's what appeals to Georgia as much as it does too. It's like, all right, he's got a frame. He's got a family that they know that they trust and believe in. You don't got to worry about him being a flight risk in the portal or anything like that. And you also know like his best football is probably ahead of him and that you can use him in a bunch of different ways on the defensive line.
Kipp, what do you think of the Carter Lucky addition and just where Georgia is right now? Any positions that you are particularly interested in going over these next few weeks for the Bulldogs?
He reminds me of Ty Ingram Dawkins, just a guy that can kind of do it all for you as long as he could stay healthy. I like his size. He's got some short area quickness, but it's about being able to finish more than flash as a pass rusher, which is kind of where Ty Ingram Dawkins, you started to see that, his last year at Georgia, where he's got the tools. He can create havoc in the pocket once he learns how to use his hands. So he's a guy that, if he's patient with the process, the scheme and position versatility that he brings is, provides a lot of upside for a school like Georgia. I mean, what they ask their defensive linemen to do fits in perfectly with what he brings to the table as someone who, like Ben said, can play multiple techniques. So I really like the upside. He's got the motor. That the intangibles are there. So it's an easy choice for Georgia. As far as just overall on this class, I want to see what happens from this last weekend, because I looked at it. I'm like, probably set the over-under on maybe 5 guys from the last weekend's official visitors that I think end up in the class who aren't currently publicly committed to Georgia. I just think that was kind of a big group. Obviously, they still have 30, 45 guys coming in on official visits as of now. But we also know that list dwindles over the next couple of weeks as you start making decisions, as you start asking the players you've already had on campus, what are you going to do? We need to know where we stand. I think, that list will probably cut down over, double digits over the next couple of weeks. And I think this past weekend was just a big one. And even if it doesn't involve Georgia making a move for anyone, just the guys that they came in needing to solidify their stance and continue that momentum with, I think was huge for Georgia. Obviously, Caden Prothro is the guy that a lot of eyes are going to be on now with Mark Bowman, committing to USC. Now, the question of whether Prothro is a wide receiver or a tight end, I don't think you got to worry about convincing him on a specific position now. You just know, okay, we need to get another guy who can be in Todd Hartley's room right now. And well, you're a guy that was already at the top, the board. So it makes sense for Georgia to giving him a lot to think about. And then likewise, Kamari Brooks. I mean, that Alabama official visit, I'm watching that. I want to know, everyone just, I don't want to say assumed it's going to be Georgia for this guy, but just because he's at North Oconee, he's right down the road. But I mean, just looking at the edge rusher position board, it just feels like it's Kamari Brooks or it's, well, I don't know. What are we going to do at this position? I just think that recruitment, which is why in our Junkyard roundtable, I had him as the most important recruitment just because he stands out as the guy that Georgia's recruiting this cycle. He is not currently publicly committed to Georgia, and Alabama is putting a lot of effort into that recruitment. So how that, unfolds is fascinating to me.
I did just want to say I liked what Kipp was saying about the volume of guys that I think will have committed from the May 30th weekend. I also think June 13th weekend is going to be pretty heavy just because there's already so many committed guys already that are going to be on campus that weekend. So just like the amount of people. I think Kipp brings up a good point, though. Like over the last 2 years, at least, the highest percentage hit rate that Georgia has been from that June 20th weekend. And I think the reason why is exactly what Kipp said. You're figuring out your board throughout the first couple of weekends. You're figuring out who comes on visits and says that they're locked in and who's saying we're still looking around. You also like what, you start to figure out, all right, we've got 2 safeties, we've got 2 linebackers, whatever position it might be. You might have some safeties or linebackers or interior offensive linemen or whatever that might look like at the end of the month. And they end up not taking those visits when that weekend comes because they've either figured their situation out prior or Georgia has said, hey, maybe you should take a look at another official visit that weekend because we're not necessarily sure we're going to have the space for you. So I think you end up having a pretty high hit percentage June 20th weekend because if you've gotten to the point that you're still coming on that official visit and other recruiting things haven't played out, there's typically a reason for that as well. I will also add, I don't know a whole lot about Gavin Honor. That said, someone that Georgia clearly saw this spring, identified as a real talent, speedy, 5'10", 170. I don't want to say slot receiver type because on film he does more than that. But I think that when you're looking in Georgia's offense, that's probably where he's likely to be featured. I know people are going to say, though, he's a California kid that's committing a year and a half early. I can't pay attention to it or really care that much. I get it. I understand it. But I will also say, this is just another James Coley. This is what James Coley does. James Coley gets guys to commit to his position group. And we're still seeing it play out with Vance Spafford. I saw a lot of Vance Spafford 2.0. Oh, he's in the class, but it's not going to be a year from now. It's like, we'll see. But I still think it's notable when you're going across the country. I mean, Gavin Honor is a guy that is, of course, getting recruited by West Coast schools. He liked Georgia for one reason or another, and he came over for an unofficial visit this past weekend for multiple days, wanted to hang out, and it was very obvious this was I want to commit to Georgia. I want to come over for a couple of days visit, and I'm planning to commit to Georgia when I leave. And the fact that Georgia is making that kind of impression on guys from modern day, I mean, look, it can't hurt whether or not he ends up signing in Georgia's 2027 class. Who knows? But he is the first member of Georgia's 2027 class. And for that reason, it is important because it's kind of kicking off that next year's cycle already.
Yeah, anytime you can get a guy from modern day, I don't really care what year he's in, you're going to take it because that's one of the top programs in the nation. All right, guys, switching from future Bulldogs to some past Bulldogs, some former Bulldogs, some NFL news this week. I want to start with shout out David Andrews. 9 years in the NFL. He retires as a New England Patriot. Shout out to David. I think he told the media that, look, he didn't want to play for another team. He wanted to be a New England Patriot, and he hung it up. Great Bulldog, a guy that had a fantastic NFL career. I'll shout out David when Mike Bobo was promoted back to offensive coordinator. I was able to track down his number, and I thought he's not going to want to talk. But I'll reach out to David and see. And he called me back, was great, raved about Mike Bobo. You could tell how excited he was. So shout out to David Andrews. Kipp, you wrote the story about him retiring, a guy that had a heck of a college career, and that translated to some big things in the NFL.
Yeah, a guy that had to convince Georgia that he was worthy of an offer. He camped there so many times. And at the end of the day, his size still had, those in Athens questioning whether he could hold up at the point of attack. He was going to go to Duke, and they convinced him just to come in and camp again. And I still remember, like, they threw this 425-pound defensive tackle on him from Middle Georgia. And like, this was the rep that if he holds his own, he gets the offer. And he just kind of walks him down. He just takes one step back. I remember this pass said, just taking one step, and then basically holding at the end. And the coaching staff's like, well, I mean, there's nothing left for us to do at this point. We got to extend the offer. And it's like, this was a guy that just grew up wanting to go to Georgia and basically had to just, I'm not going to say beg the staff, but I mean, I can't imagine this type of recruitment happening today where, you've camped there like 5, 6, 7, 8 times, don't have the offer, have the other options, and then you get it at the end, and he still took it. And yeah, had the same question marks when he went in the NFL draft, went undrafted. But then, just continued to prove, everyone wrong that doubted him. Had himself a really nice career, started at 120 games and earned, $34 million in the process, a couple Super Bowl rings, snapping for Tom Brady. I think on one side, it's unfortunate because he had the shoulder injury and the Patriots, cut him in March. So it was basically this, kind of forced his hand, like you said, only playing for the Patriots. But they had that ceremony out there, and gosh, I can only imagine as a Falcons fan, when Julio Jones retired, if maybe we could have done something like that for a guy that just, poured his heart out for most of his career. So I think it was, a really nice ceremony. He was obviously very emotional about it, a family man. He's going to enjoy some, much deserved time with his family, raising his kids, playing golf. But I mean, I expect David Andrews to be in the game of football and coaching in the very near future.
Second team All SEC player while at Georgia. I remember when he was coming out to the draft, I remember Bill Belichick being at Pro Day and working David Andrews out. We're all like, he's paying a lot of attention to him. And then he goes undrafted, winds up in New England, was part of the Patriots all 2010s team. Kipp mentioned 2 Super Bowl championships, hell of a career. And shout out to David Andrews. Ben, any memories of David Andrews, anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, Super Bowl champion, like Kipp said, he's multiple times, probably one too many, I would argue. But yeah, he great career. I think Kipp nailed it. Like, this is a guy that was doubted at every turn, and it's a guy that will go down as a Georgia legend and a New England Patriots legend. And I think that's when those are the 2 things on your football resume. That's a pretty good football resume to have. I mean, you don't see a ton of careers like that. And I think we're going to see fewer and fewer careers like that through the years. And that's someone that I don't think anybody who has ever been a fan of a team that supports David Andrews' team that would ever have a single bad word to say about him.
The funny thing going into this episode, I did not expect us to talk about 2 different center situations in the NFL, but that's just what kind of happens in the offseason. Detroit Lions, Frank Ragnow retires, one of the best centers in the game, only 29. It sounds like just the wear and tear was too much. And we bring that up because all of a sudden Tate Ratledge is sort of in the middle of this conversation. Tate, who played right guard at Georgia, but got some reps before his senior season at center because they wanted to be ready in case someone needed to come in behind Jared Wilson. And, he's taken some center snaps with the Lions during minicamp because Frank Ragnow wasn't there. And I think you have to look at him as a guy that might be the favorite to be the center for the Detroit Lions, a team that's going to be in the Super Bowl mix this year. They drafted him. They drafted Miles Frazier, another guard from LSU. And it's just going to be fascinating to see what happens with Tate Ratledge. I went back and looked at our notes from his last spring at Georgia and, was asked about playing the center position and getting some reps there. He was still primarily playing right guard, but they wanted him ready. And he said, quote, "It made me have a lot more respect for what Sed did. I called him and I told him, I was like, I have a newfound respect for what you did all last year." And, that was something Georgia did, as a precautionary measure to be ready in case he got hurt. But Kipp, that may wind up really paying off for Tate, getting what reps he got at center at Georgia. He might be the Detroit Lions starting center when the season gets started.
Yeah, you look at his height and you wonder, gosh, is he too big for center? But you look at Ragnow, he was 6'6", 308. So very similar size. So it makes a lot of sense, especially when you kind of look at the wingspan. That is kind of where Tate got dinged a little bit, is that he doesn't have the greatest length for an offensive lineman. But you plug him in at center, and I think it just makes a lot more sense. It fits more to his strengths. Now, that is to say he has to actually, be good at playing center, at snapping, at, calling all the plays. But he's played a lot of football. And I think that versatility, the fact that he's willing to just play through, injury, play through anything, I think it just fits the Lions. We talked about that when he was drafted. It just fits that program to a T. So I think it's really an outstanding opportunity for him to carve out maybe a longer career than he would have had at guard.
Ben, what do you think about that prospect for Tate potentially being the Lions center? And again, to me, it's just really interesting. Just getting a little bit of run there at Georgia. That might wind up really helping Tate in the long run.
Well, yeah, for Tate, I'm fully confident he's the type of guy that'll do whatever he needs to do to get on the field as quick and as long as possible. And so if that means he sort of recalibrates what he feels he is as an NFL player for that specific franchise that he's with, I could see him being the Lions center for a really long time. To Kipp's point, you got to actually be good at snapping and playing center to be able to hold on to that. But again, Tate's been there. He's done that type of stuff. And I think that he is more equipped than most guys that have primarily played guard to slide in at center and figure it out. I will say, if I'm Stacey Searles, assuming this works out for Tate, I'm selling this one hard because, Georgia preaches the development conversation, and sometimes it can fall on deaf ears probably if you don't have great examples or stories, like case studies or stories to be able to tell. You can sit here and say, this is a guy that was not supposed to play center, never really played center at Georgia, but needed him to get work at center in certain situations. And he developed a skill set that allowed him to get on the field as a rookie because he did some of that at Georgia. I would be selling that hard if I'm Stacey Searles, and I'm sure that he will.
All right, switching over to the Diamond, Georgia baseball. Tough close to the season, 11-9 loss to Oklahoma State on Sunday. Ends Georgia's run in the Athens Regional. Situation where Georgia had an opportunity. At one point had a 7-3 lead. They blow that lead. And then, in the end, nearly have a double play to end an inning. I think it was the pitcher covering, can't get a foot down on the bag. And then Oklahoma State winds up walking it off. Before we turn it over to Olivia Sayer, I want to ask either of you any parting thoughts on Georgia baseball, anything y'all want to add before we bring the expert in and let her break down what happened.
I would say good year, but disappointing year. You can't have a top 8 seed in your own regional and not feel like it's a letdown to not get out of it, especially when you were as close to, getting to Omaha last year as you were. Probably a little bit overreaction of a meltdown, in my opinion, just because baseball is a fickle sport. I think it's what makes baseball postseason so fun and fascinating is you can have a 4 seed like Murray State make it to a super regional. You can have a team like Oklahoma State that was basically 500 that bats just get kind of hot and causes some issues for Georgia. And so, disappointing, but all in all, the Georgia baseball program is in a good spot looking forward. And I think that that's going to continue to be the case under Wes Johnson. And that's why he got an extension through 2031, even though people are going to poke fun at the pre-tournament extension because of the way it turned out.
Hindsight's 2020 when you get an extension like that. There's basically only one way for it to go. But having him locked down, fully filled, the upgrades they've made there, significant with the pitching lab and everything they've done to make sure that Georgia baseball is state of the art and something that Wes and his coaching staff can sell. Kipp, any thoughts on how this season ended and then just in general where the program is?
You knew this team was going to live and die by the home run. That's who they've been the last couple of years. They've hit more homers than basically anyone over that time. Wes Johnson came in with a pitching coach pedigree, and he goes in this offseason earlier than what anyone expected because of the lack of quality arms out there. So I think not going to talk about, who you put in the rotation, who you want to sit on the mound for this regional. But yeah, knowing that you need to go into the portal this offseason, obviously keep your own talent, but you need to find some arms. You got to improve the bullpen and set yourself up for better success, because I think in the end, that's where it was. They did not have enough guys that you could trust to send out there. And in that last game, you had guys pitching that hadn't pitched in like 23, 24 days, having to go out there on the mound. That's, it's college baseball. It's a little different, but that's just not a recipe for success, especially with someone who's known for being a pitching guru. So your team is a team known for home runs. So let's balance it out maybe a little bit, improve the arms that you have. And we kind of knew that going into the season. We said this team will go as far as the bullpen takes them. And, well, this is how far they went.
It also, I will say, just kind of goes to show how important that game 2 and that 1-2 matchup or 1-3 matchup is in these series, because once you lose game 2, the pitching decisions that you end up having to make become so complicated. The depth that you have, especially on this roster, makes it so challenging to make the right decision on those things. It's like, I love the format, but it is like you lose that game to Duke, and it's kind of like, how do you even find a way to win these next 3 games? Like, even if they had found a way to pull out that Oklahoma State game, which they should have, when you're up 7-3 at home and it's in a regional, you should find a way to win that game. But it was going to be tough to win 3 straight against Oklahoma State and Duke twice, given the pitching staff where it was at.
Yeah, I have no idea who they would have started in that Duke game, just because it was basically, pull out everything you have against Oklahoma State, which is obviously what it had to be to try to keep the season alive. I will say, the one defense of Georgia, go look at all the other teams that got knocked out. Vanderbilt, Ole Miss last night, several other marquee teams that just couldn't get out of the regional. And, as much as the SEC, I'm sure, wasn't thrilled to see all that, man, it was very entertaining to watch. I know Georgia fans are disappointed, but you couldn't really take a regional for granted because the competition was fierce, and a lot of the teams that were seated lower wound up finding a way to get out and move on to supers. All right, that's enough talk from us. Let's let the actual Georgia baseball expert come on. Olivia Sayer did a little video for us, just breaking down what went wrong for Georgia and some look ahead to the offseason, people they're going to lose, and what to watch for as far as that goes.
Hey everyone, I hope that you are all doing well. I hope that you are having a wonderful start to your week. Now that Georgia's season has come to an end, let's talk a little bit about what happened in the Athens Regional, put a recap on the season, and then look ahead to what the roster might look like for 2026. So before we talk a little bit about what happened this past weekend, I do want to talk about one thing, and that is that yes, teams are judged based upon what happens in the postseason. Nobody's going to remember a team for an incredible regular season that it had if it falls flat on its face when it matters most. However, I do not want this premature ending to neglect the successful season that Georgia baseball had, because you look at it, the Bulldogs lost about 100 of their 151 home runs last season, and all the players that left still hit. It was either 144 or 145 this season, which is the second most in program history. They also set the team strikeout record, the pitching staff did, for a program in a single season. They had their most regular season wins since 1990. So when you look at this season as a whole, there's a lot to be proud of for this Georgia baseball team. That being said, it obviously did not get it done when it mattered most, so let's talk a little bit about why that happened. So when looking at the Athens Regional, there is so much to dive into. I feel like we could start with maybe 10 or 15 different areas. However, let's start with Georgia's Saturday night game against Duke, because that, in my mind, changed the entire trajectory of the regional. And that is because Georgia put itself in a hole. So the way regionals are set up, it is incredibly hard to get out of the loser's bracket because you have to win 3 straight while the other team only has to win 1 of 2. And Georgia just didn't really have the starting pitching for that because it used Leighton Finley on Friday night. I did say at the time, the minute Georgia took that 5-0 lead, I would have pulled Finley. I understand why they kept him in there. They wanted a veteran that could set the tone. And in the postseason, anything can happen, and the last thing you want to do is pull your starter, and then the bullpen blows that lead. However, I think Georgia would have been in a much different situation had it had Brian Curley on Saturday against Duke like it did, Leighton Finley on, I guess that would have been Sunday morning. Maybe you don't use Colton Smith, you have him for potentially Sunday night. JT Quinn would be a Monday game. So Georgia just kind of ran out of starting pitching a little bit. And that's largely in part due to what happened against Duke. But the thing that stands out to me about that Duke game is Georgia had its opportunities to score. After the 5th inning, because I believe it only had 1 hit, and that was the Zabo home run through the first 5 innings. Shout out to Duke starter Kyle Johnson, was lights out. But after that, Georgia had, I believe it was 9 base runners over the final however many innings that was. And it only had 2 runs to show for it. And the Bulldogs struggled with runners in scoring position, kind of like they had a lot down the stretch of the regular season. There were multiple times runners on first and third, maybe nobody out, 1 out, couldn't get it in. They were, I believe it was 1 for 8 with runners in scoring position, and 5 of the 7 outs were strikeouts. So that was definitely a big situation, a big not taking advantage of your opportunities there. And that kind of carried over into Sunday a little bit. Georgia actually did really good against one of the best left-handers in college baseball in Oklahoma State's ace. But once again, once it built that 7-3 lead, it really struggled with runners in scoring position. And the biggest part that stands out to me was the top of that 9th inning on Sunday when Georgia had runners on second and third because they pinch ran Devin Obie for Christian Adams and he stole second, nobody out, and you go strikeout, 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 all 3 were swinging. So that, in my mind, kind of shifted the momentum of the entire game. Just Oklahoma State saying, hey, we really got out of a big scoring threat here. Now let's see what we can do in our bottom of the 9th inning, which it kind of is a little strange that Georgia was hitting top of the 9th in its own ballpark, but that's a whole nother discussion for a whole nother day. And so I think when you look at this weekend, I just think the missed opportunities are probably going to be the biggest takeaway from it. Like I mentioned, with those runners in scoring position, with the failing to capitalize. But I've also seen a little bit of criticism for Georgia this past weekend, and that is for 2 separate things that I want to touch on. So the first is what I believe is warranted, and that is the criticism for some of the coaching decisions as far as who to pitch. And the first one is the decision to pull JT Quinn after 4 innings. And Wes Johnson was asked about this after the game. He said he talked to Quinn prior to that inning, and he told him, we need you to empty the tank right here. We need you to give everything you have. And that's what JT did. He went out and he struck out the side. But at that point, he had retired 7 of the last batters he faced. As I just mentioned, struck out the side in the 4th, was at 78 pitches, which was a season high for him. Remember, he started the year on a pitch count because he was coming off an injury he suffered at Ole Miss. But I think at this point in the season, when you're in the postseason, when your backs are against the wall, you've got to ride your starters for as long as you can. And the way JT was throwing, his velocity was fine, all that kind of stuff was fine. I definitely think he could have stayed out there for at least 1 more inning because that was the inning that Hoskins came in, walked the bases loaded, believe he even gave up a run, and then Zeldin came in and just a couple of defensive things behind him, tied the game on a sacrifice fly. So not an ideal situation for Georgia there, and I definitely would have liked to see JT get a couple more innings in him, but the other main pitching decision was to bring Tyler McLaughlin in the top of the ninth, or bottom of the ninth inning. Once again, confusing that Oklahoma State is hitting in the bottom of the ninth inning, but I understand why Wes Johnson did this. So Zach Harris was going through some soreness, and Jordan Stevens, they wanted to save him in case he pitched the night game. DJ Radke was throwing really well, but his velocity was down. I believe his fastball was around 92 miles an hour, typically up there to that 95, 96. And he seemed to be laboring a little bit. But to pitch a guy that has not thrown since May 9th, albeit he did have a save for Georgia, one save this season in league play, but he had not thrown the ball since May 9th, and we saw that. It was a leadoff walk on 4 straight pitches, I believe it was, in the game-tying home run, and you ended up having to bring Zach Harris in anyway. So what I would have done, I would have either started with Harris, although he was dealing with soreness. If you didn't want to go to him, Nate Taylor was fresh and ready in the bullpen, only threw 12 pitches the night before, ended up leading the team in ERA, pitched some really clutch situations and came through for Georgia this entire season, especially down the stretch. You could have brought Colton Smith back, who was on 43 pitches, I believe, the night before, yes. So he could have been an option. I just think you had a few other guys that could have come into the game that weren't exactly Tyler McLaughlin, and obviously proved fatal. But the reason that Wes Johnson did it once again is because Harris was a little sore and wanted to save Jordan Stevens for the nightcap. So he said they needed someone new to get those outs if you were going to play the next 3 games. So I definitely believe those 2 areas of criticism were warranted, as well as potentially the decision to let Leighton Finley throw 114 pitches. Completely understand starting him on Friday. Would have done the exact same thing because you want that veteran that can get you out to that solid start, but probably would have pulled him once that game got out of hand so that way you could go back to him if needed. But the area of criticism that I've seen, and I'm going to keep this very brief because at the end of the day it is an opinion that I do not believe is warranted, is the way that Georgia plays the game. And here's my take on this as a college student. These are kids who were playing in the last collegiate game of their career. If you're talking about the 2 that hit the bat flips, which were Slade Alford and Christian Adams, last collegiate game likely of their careers. Let them have a little fun. If they want to celebrate a big home run that they hit in a winner-go-home elimination game, why not? As long as they're not saying the magic words that you probably shouldn't say to someone's face, as long as they're not saying that to someone else, then who cares if they want to have a little bat flip? Who cares if they want to stare at a home run that they just blasted into the parking lot? Who cares if Trey Phelps wants to do a fun little celebration at third base to his own dugout? And so I think some of the things that are being said, whether bad people, they're bad humans, all that kind of stuff, I think it's getting a little out of hand. I think part of the way that Georgia plays the game is why it has so much success. They really enjoy playing with each other. They have a little bit of swagger and confidence that Wes Johnson kind of brought into the program, because when he first took over the program, it wasn't really all that confident in itself. I mean, you look at its past few seasons, it also had a bunch of guys who he brought in through the transfer portal that sort of needed that confidence boost, whether it was that Slade Alford, that Henry Hunter, all those types of guys. And that's kind of what Wes Johnson brought to the program. And that, in my opinion, is what makes it so successful. So like I mentioned, if a guy wants to stare at a home run that he hit in a big moment, in perhaps one of the biggest games of his career, who cares? And I think some of the ways that it was handled this past weekend, whether it be by an opposing coach that I know was super unhappy from what I was told from some things that happened, whether it was some of the umpiring decisions. We saw it with Duke as well. I mean, Duke's player got ejected for coming out of the dugout and celebrating with his own teammates after a big moment. So I think the thing about that is if the NCAA wants to really enforce those rules, then just start enforcing them and teams will stop doing it. But until that happens, let the teams have fun. Heck, I watched Tennessee last night. I watched Liam Doyle go out there and practically put on an entire show, and that was kind of fun to watch for me, even though I historically did not grow up as a Tennessee fan. It was kind of fun to watch that team just sort of have fun, have that swagger. So I have no issue with that. I think it's being completely blown out of proportion, and that is all I will say on that. So as far as looking ahead to next season, there is going to be a lot of change on this roster, and that's just the nature of the game. Wes Johnson has said before, he really prioritizes having a veteran team. He likes having an older team because older teams know how to win in the SEC. They know how to win when it matters most, down the stretch, at clutch moments, whatever. But with that also comes that roster turnover a lot. And Wes did talk about a little bit how he's not going to lean on the portal as much just because he feels really good about his freshman class. He feels really good about the freshman class from last year, whether that's Eric Parker, who was drafted by the Dodgers. You have a Bryce Clavon in that class. You have a Nate Taylor in that class. And he also feels really good about the guys that he's bringing in this year. But very quickly, or maybe not so quickly because it's a big roster, I have Georgia's roster from this season, well, its final stats on here, and I'm just going to go through and kind of let you know the state of the program, where Georgia's at for next year. So Rylan Zabrowski will be gone. He is out of eligibility. Same thing with Slate Alford. Trey Phelps is a draft-eligible sophomore. I think he might want to come back one more year just to sort of have a full consistent season. Started the year off not so hot, and then went through that hamstring injury, but did finish really well down the stretch. So I would not be surprised if he does get drafted, but even if kids get drafted, they can still make the decision to come back. Colby Branch is a very tricky one, not really sure what he's going to do. He's a guy that will probably likely hear his name called, but at the same time, maybe he wants to do what Slade Alford did, which is come back, work on his strikeout rate a little bit, and really fine-tune that before heading off to the league. Robbie Burnett's out of eligibility. Christian Adams is a funky one. He actually played 2 seasons at junior college, so similar to Dylan Goldstein. He could probably try to get another year if he wanted, but not sure if Georgia wants to go down that path again as it did with Dylan Goldstein. I may have said Charlie, but I meant Dylan Goldstein. Nolan McCarthy is out of eligibility. Ryan Black is a draft-eligible junior. Daniel Jackson is a sophomore. Don't know if he's draft-eligible, but he'll likely be back. Henry Hunter's out of eligibility. Devin Obie's out of eligibility. Bryce Clavon's a freshman. He'll be back. Charlie Jones actually entered the portal. Eric Parker will be back. Trey King entered the portal. Brennan Hudson should be back. Cade Brown should be back. And Matthew Hoskins on the mound. Yeah, he's on the batting average section, though, because he played 1 game in outfield. But he's another interesting one with the decision to make. Brian Curley is going to have a really interesting decision because he did get drafted. He talked about how he wanted to come to Georgia and sort of fine-tune that development. And there's 2 ways you could look at this. The first way is that maybe he wants to stay 1 more year and kind of have a full year as a starter and fine-tune that aspect of his game. But at the same time, the dude's going to get drafted probably pretty high, so nobody would blame him if he took a chance there. Leighton Finley is another very interesting one. He will probably get drafted, but it's just a matter of if he wants to come back or not and go ahead and go to the league. Nate Taylor will be back. JT Quinn is draft eligible. We'll see what he does. And then you got a bunch of the bullpen guys. Justin Bird, Jordan Stevens, Eric Hammond, Tyler McLaughlin will be gone. Paul Farley, DJ Radke could be gone. Zach Harris could be gone. Davis Chastain, Colton Smith's a very interesting one, could be gone. Brian Zeldin will be gone. Zach Brown will probably not be gone. Charlie Goldstein's out of eligibility. Alton Davis is a tricky one. Colin Caldwell, Lucas Murray Jui lands in the portal. So, yeah. So a lot of turnover on this roster, and it'll be really interesting to see how Georgia addresses it. I think some of its biggest needs in the portal are going to be obviously replacing those hitters like that Slade Alford, potentially your Colby Branch, Burnett, Zabrowski, all those guys. And then Wes Johnson talked about how he wanted to get some starters that could provide length for Georgia. So that was one of Georgia's biggest weaknesses towards the beginning of the season, and it kind of caught up with them again in the postseason, and that is starters not going deep into games. So he talked about how Georgia's really going to go out and focus on that. I think it's going to try to bring in some left-handed pitchers. On the regional roster, it only had 1 left-hander, and that was Alton Davis, who didn't even pitch in the regional. So needs some left-handers there. And other than that, we'll kind of just see how everything shakes out. The draft is going to play a big part in everything because it only takes 1 team to like a guy for it to blow up Georgia's entire roster. So it should be very interesting. But that is all for the recap of the season and looking ahead. As far as what's next, I will have some off-season content. There's already a transfer portal tracker up on Dogs 24/7, and I'm going to have a roster breakdown sometime later this week. The draft's coming up, we have the portals coming up, and then I'm going to try to do a couple of features on some guys as well. But I do want to thank all of you guys for following along during this season. I had an absolute blast. It was so much fun getting to cover it. Big thank you to everyone at Dogs 24/7 for the opportunity and all of the kind words, and I'm excited to do it for another season. So yeah, that is all for now, and I guess I will see you all later. Bye!
Great stuff from Olivia. Deserves a major shout out for the job she did covering Georgia baseball. And to the point that she made, season might be over, but there will be plenty to talk about with Georgia baseball because they will be building their roster for 2026. So stay glued to Dogs 24/7. Olivia will have you covered with any news there. All right, before we get out of here, some more baseball news I wanted to run by you guys. Atlanta Braves making a big move on Monday. Matt Tuiasosopo is out as third base coach, and a familiar name is back. Freddie Gonzalez, the one-time manager of the Braves, a former third base coach for the Braves. I think that was during the Bobby Cox era. He is back coaching third base. Now, Kipp, I want to start with you and get your thoughts, and I'll just kind of throw mine in. Very glad to see a change at third base because I thought that there were some sins this season that just made no sense. But I'm not all the way on board with it being Freddie Gonzalez. What are your thoughts on Freddie coming back to the picture?
The Braves, do they know other organizations exist? Like, it just feels like every single move that's been made, the last 2 to 3 years, has been either former Braves players or former Braves coaches. It's like we only have is there just one list? Like, I don't know if they don't use Rolodexes anymore, but maybe expand the search a little bit. Yeah, I think that we looked lost at third base. I mean, as far as the last couple of weeks, I mean, we've seen some green lights and some calls that make no sense whatsoever. If the Braves weren't just struggling like they were, we'd all just be talking about, I mean, this makes perfect sense. It looked like he was in a little bit over his head. Sure, let's bring Freddie Gonzalez back. But the fact that the Braves are not performing well this season is teetering on the brink, it appears. And we're talking about a head coach in Snicker who's probably, I mean, the fact that they're probably going to let him just run out this season and then thanks for the memories. It just creates a really awkward scenario where you brought back a former coach to maybe push your head coach and help your head coach, but it's someone you fired. It's someone that no one expects to be the head coach. If you just decide 3 weeks from now, all right, enough is enough, Snicker's gone. Freddie Gonzalez, it should not be the Braves' next head coach. You should have a serious coaching search. You should honestly at this point have a meeting and think about the organization from top to bottom, because the decision making is off the rails right now. The biggest, news that you had to brag about this calendar year is that you got some office buildings. Remember before the season when we were bragging about the Battery buying a bunch of office buildings? Where does that look now? It just looks like, a complete facepalm because you didn't spend any money on your bullpen. You let a guy go in Griffin Canning, who's outstanding for the Mets so far. Every move has been a disaster. So this one, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't really feel like it's in the top 10 worst things the Braves have done this year. But it's just really embarrassing right now to bring in Freddie Gonzalez as your third base coach, because it is a one big, what are we even doing right now? While I'm watching Gwinnett Stripers tweet out the fact that you had Jesse Chavez starting last week. It's just like we are in some weird cycle of reruns that we cannot escape. And someone has to come in and say, enough is enough. We need some different decisions to be made because you've run out. There's no more magic. This is 2021 is not walking back through that door. Get someone else in here that can help this franchise, because the window, it seems to be closing. All those long-term contracts that everyone bragged about the Braves doing 5 years ago, we're now talking about, are we even going to keep Ozzie Albies? He's going into the last year of his contract. Are these even good deals? Are we going to see Ronald? Can he carry an offense now? Now it's a completely different conversation, and it's one that shouldn't be had because Max Fried, leading the majors in ERA, walked out the door. Freddie Freeman, you should have got that contract done. I don't care what the agent said, out the door. These are guys that should have been lifelong Braves, and it just makes the fan base even angrier right now that we're talking about our third base coach being Freddie Gonzalez.
No, you're not angry, Kip. You don't seem angry.
I was gonna say the one thing is that Kipp is not bitter, and that's the beautiful part of it. No, the one couple things I was gonna say. One, if you guys will remember, Freddie Gonzalez getting fired is how Brian Snicker got the job. He became the interim coach during the season, and they decided to keep him. And I'm glad you mentioned Freddie Freeman, because this is going to be the what I think happened. What I've convinced myself is that Alex Anthopoulos saw a bunch of tweets that are like, "Man, I miss Freddie. God, why did we get rid of Freddie?" And he said, "Say no more." And Freddie Gonzalez is back. Ben, you can't convince me otherwise. That is the theory I'm going with.
Yeah, I mean, I think any theory is a theory we at least have to give some credence to at this point when it comes to the Braves. I mean, I will say it feels like this being Snickers last year is boiling towards the inevitable at this point. So it is interesting timing, bringing back this specific guy when it seems like that's the way that's going. I will, if I am allowed to play devil's advocate for a second, I have this philosophy with football. I think it applies to basketball too. But when you have coaching staffs that have multiple former head coaches or multiple former managers on it, like, I don't think that can be a bad thing. Like, when you have multiple people on staff that are in decision-making roles or part of staff meetings and conversations that have experience at the top of the top, it can't hurt things. Now, I understand the Freddie Gonzalez name just sort of makes it all the more interesting. But, you know, it's sort of like when you go back to 2021 at Georgia, it's like you have Will Muschamp and you've got Todd Monken. These weren't even guys that were successful head coaches necessarily at the college level, but the fact that you had coordinators that were head coaches made your team better, I believe. Does that apply as much to baseball? I have no idea, but if I'm allowed to play devil's advocate, that's where I'm playing it.
Absolute Southern Miss slander right there, talking about Todd Monken, but benefit of the doubt, Ben. That's what we've always called him on our show. All right, we're going to get ready to wrap up this episode. Before we do, Ben, I want you to tease Stay Wolk this week. We'll do another episode. What should the folks be on the lookout for?
We'll go into a little bit more depth than we did here on Carter Lucky and Gavin Honor. I think there's a chance that we'll have a guest, but I also don't want to promise a guest just because we have so much to talk about when it comes to we had 18 official visitors last weekend. We're going to be around the same conversation, previewing for this upcoming weekend, talking about 30 to 40 recruits that are going to be on Georgia's campus, and also doing one of my, longer interviews may not be the best use of time. So I don't want to say that we won't. That said, Georgia's had some commitments over the last couple of weeks. If we can get them on the show, we would like to. So
we'll wrap it up right there. Thanks to Kipp and Ben for popping on. Thanks to everyone who watched this live, everyone who is watching or listening to it after the fact. Go to dogs247.com. As I mentioned earlier in this episode, 60% off, and that sale is not going to be live for much longer, so please take advantage of that. Go to our YouTube, go to anywhere you get your podcast, and subscribe to the Junkyard Dawgcast. Please rate and review as well. That always helps us out, helps our podcast get out there. Go to our TikTok as well, Dogs247. A lot of good content as we roll through the rest of the summer. So we will end the episode right there. For Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.